I used to think Derek's cruelest insult was calling me a boring office worker on our 5th anniversary. I was wrong. The true highlight was watching his face when he learned his uninspired wife had inherited a $45 million empire. The only condition to claim it was the signed divorce papers waiting on the attorney's desk. He wanted a life of luxury, but my grandmother showed it to him right before kicking him back into the debt he created. My name is Alara Sterling. At 32 years old, I felt less like a living woman and more like a piece of office furniture that had been depreciating in value for a decade. The fluorescent lights of Urban Edge Designs hummed with a headache-inducing frequency that seemed to drill directly into my temples. I stared at the render on my screen. A soulless gray living room for a client who wanted industrial chic on a shoestring budget. My eyes burned. It was 8:45 in the evening, and the Chicago skyline outside the window was a blur of rain and indifference. I shut down my computer, the screen fading to black much like my own ambitions had over the last 4 years. The commute home was a haze of wet pavement and brake lights. When I finally unlocked the door to our mid-range apartment on the 3rd floor, the air inside was stale, smelling faintly of old pizza boxes and neglect. The television was the only source of light in the living room. Derek Vance, my husband of 5 years, sat on the sofa with his headset on, his thumbs moving frantically over a controller. He was 34 years old, yet he looked exactly like the college sophomore I had met 12 years ago, just softer around the edges and harder in the eyes. He did not look up when I dropped my bag on the floor. "About time," Derek muttered into his headset before sliding one ear cup off. He turned his head slightly, his eyes still glued to the screen. "I'm starving. Did you pick up anything?" "The fridge is empty." I stood there, the exhaustion settling into my bones like lead. Derek was currently in the 4th year of his self-proclaimed startup phase. He called himself a visionary entrepreneur. The bank statements called him unemployed. He spent his days talking about million-dollar ideas and disrupting markets. But the only thing he successfully disrupted was my credit score. I worked 12 hours today. "Derek," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And whose fault is that?" He laughed at something his teammate said in the game, then glanced at me with that familiar sneer. "If you had a little more hustle, you wouldn't have to slave away for peanuts. I told you, once my app launches, we won't have to worry about your little paycheck." The words were a physical blow, reopening the wound he had inflicted this morning. The memory of our argument over coffee played in my mind with agonizing clarity. I had asked him to pick up a few shifts at a consulting firm just to help with the rent. He had exploded. "You just don't get it, do you?" he had shouted, spilling coffee on the table I had just cleaned. "You're just nothing special, Alara. You have no vision. You're a boring office worker holding me back. I am trying to build an empire here, and you are worrying about a $500 electric bill. You are small-minded." I walked past him into the kitchen to pour a glass of water. My hands were trembling. I was small-minded. I was boring. I was the stone tied around the ankle of a genius. That was the narrative he had fed me until I almost believed it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, cutting through the noise of gunfire from the television. I pulled it out. The screen displayed a number I recognized instantly, though I never saved it to avoid Derek's prying eyes. It was the Silverleaf Senior Living Facility. My heart hammered against my ribs. I answered, turning my back to the living room. "Hello, Mrs. Vance." The voice on the other end was soft, professional, and laced with that specific tone of pity reserved for tragedies. "I am so sorry to call this late, but—" "It's your grandmother. Eleanor passed away peacefully an hour ago." The glass of water slipped from my fingers and shattered on the tile floor. For a moment, there was no sound in the world, just the ringing in my ears. My grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, to the world, and to my own family. She was a reclusive, Senile old woman who had lost the family fortune years ago and cut ties with everyone. My parents and cousins had written her off, refusing to visit a woman who could no longer offer them financial gain. They did not know. They did not know that for the past 7 years, I was the only one who visited her. They did not know that beneath the facade of frailty, her mind was as sharp as a diamond cutter. She was the only person who ever told me I was worth something, and now she was gone. The grief hit me not as a scream, but as a suffocating silence. Ilara Derek called out, annoyed by the noise of the breaking glass. "What did you break?" Now I ended the call and walked back into the living room. I felt cold. Whatever warmth had existed in my life had just been extinguished. "My grandmother died," I said. Derek paused the game. He turned to look at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw him arrange his features into a mask of sympathy. He sighed, shaking his head. "Oh, babe, I'm sorry. That's tough." The act lasted exactly 3 seconds. He picked up his controller again, his eyes narrowing as the gears of greed began to turn in his head. "So," he started, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Did that old hag leave anything? Or is it just debts like your dad said? I mean, we can't afford to inherit someone's medical bills right now." I stared at him. The man I married, the man who claimed to love me, his first thought was not for my loss, but for his potential gain. I don't know. I lied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Derek hummed, scratching his chin. "Well, we have to be smart about this. If there is no money involved, I don't see why we should drag ourselves all the way to Boston for a funeral. Flight tickets are expensive. Ilara, we need to focus on my launch." He turned back to the screen, unpausing his game. The gunfire resumed. I looked at the back of his head, and for the first time in years, the sadness began to curdle into something else. Something hot and sharp. He had no idea what was coming. The funeral took place at a towering stone church in the historic district of Boston, a relic from an era when the sterling name commanded immediate respect. The air inside was frigid, smelling of damp stone, lilies, and the kind of dusty silence that accumulates over centuries. It was a somber affair, attended mostly by elderly business associates who remembered my grandmother as a titan of industry before she vanished from the public eye. Derek stood beside me, looking immaculate. He was wearing a brand-new navy Italian suit that fit him perfectly. I knew exactly how much it cost because I had received the fraud alert on my phone while I was packing my black dress. $2,500. He had charged it to my emergency credit card, claiming he needed to look presentable for my family's sake. Watching him now, shaking hands with men he had never met and nodding solemnly with a practiced frown of grief, I felt a wave of nausea. He was performing. "Did you see that guy's watch?" Derek whispered to me, leaning in close. His breath was warm against my ear, but his tone was icy with calculation. "That is a Patek Philippe. Vintage. We need to talk to him. Go over there and introduce yourself." I pulled away slightly, clutching my grandmother's rosary in my pocket. "I am here to say goodbye to my grandmother. Derek, not to network." "Don't be stupid," he hissed, his grip tightening on my elbow. "These people are connections. If the old lady left us nothing, maybe one of these fossils can give me seed funding. Ask them about the will. Find out who the executor is." I felt small and isolated. My grandmother had taught me to be strong, to stand tall against the wind. But standing next to Derek felt like being slowly eroded by sand. I wanted to cry for the woman who had secretly mailed me birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside. But Derek's greed was sucking the oxygen out of the room. Then, the atmosphere shifted. The heavy oak doors at the front of the church opened, and a man walked in who seemed to absorb the light around him. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than my annual salary. and he moved with terrifying precision. It was Arthur Blackwood. He walked straight to me. Ignoring the extended hand Derek eagerly thrust toward him. "Mrs. Vance," Arthur said. His voice was deep, devoid of any unnecessary warmth. He held out a thick, cream-colored business card. "My condolences. Eleanor spoke of you often. I am the executor of the estate. I require your presence at my office on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock for the reading of the will." Derek froze. His hand was still suspended in the air. He snatched the card from my fingers before I could even read it. "Blackwood and Associates," Derek read aloud, his eyes widening until they looked like saucers. He looked at Arthur, then back at the card. "Wait, you guys are the top corporate firm in the city. You don't handle small estates. You handle conglomerates." Arthur merely adjusted his glasses and looked at Derek with the kind of disinterest one might show a buzzing fly. "We handle the Sterling estate. Tuesday. Don't be late." As Arthur turned and walked away, Derek's entire demeanor underwent a violent transformation. The sneer vanished. The impatience evaporated. Suddenly, his arm was around my waist, pulling me into a protective, suffocating embrace. "Did you hear that, babe?" Derek whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "Top firm. That means there is money. Real money." He kissed my temple, a wet, sloppy gesture that made my skin crawl. "You okay, princess? You look pale. Let me get you a chair. I can't have my girl fainting on me now." The drive back to the hotel and the subsequent days leading up to Tuesday were a blur of Derek's delusions. He was manic. He spent the entire flight home drawing diagrams on a napkin. "I was thinking," Derek said, staring at the ceiling of the plane with a dreamy expression. "When the money comes through, we should get the new Porsche 911, and my buddy from college has this crypto project. It is going to the moon, Ilara. We put $50,000 in. We get $5 million out in 6 months. Easy." He turned to me, squeezing my knee. "And you can finally quit that depressing job. Seriously, just walk in and quit. You can stay home, manage the house, maybe help me with my schedule. You know, serve the vision, support the real work." I stared out the window at the clouds, saying nothing. The silence was my shield. I remembered the last time I visited Grandma Eleanor, her frail hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "Ilara," she had said, "watch how a man treats you when you have nothing, and watch how he treats you when he thinks you have everything. The difference will tell you who he really is." The night before the appointment, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. The space beside me in bed was cold. I saw a sliver of yellow light under the bathroom door. I walked to the door and pushed it open gently. Derek was sitting on the edge of the tub, typing furiously on his phone. He looked up, startled, and the phone vanished into his pocket so fast it was a blur. "Derek," I asked, my voice thick with sleep. "Who are you texting at 2 in the morning?" "Jesus, Ilara," he snapped, running a hand through his hair. "You scared me. I was just checking the Asian markets. For the crypto investment. I told you, I need to be on top of this." "In the bathroom." He stood up, his face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. "God, you are so paranoid. It is pathetic. Honestly. I am trying to build a future for us, and you are acting like a jealous high schooler. Go back to sleep." He brushed past me, smelling of mint toothpaste and lies. I stood in the bathroom for a long moment, looking at my reflection in the mirror. He was lying. I knew it. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt ready. Tuesday morning arrived with a brightness that felt offensive. I woke up with a heavy heart, dreading the formality of the day. But Derek woke up like it was Christmas morning. He spent an hour in the bathroom, meticulously styling his hair and checking his reflection from every angle. He wore his best suit again, the navy one he had bought for the funeral, and doused himself in enough cologne to choke a horse. I put on a simple black dress, the same one I wore to work when I had important client meetings, and slipped a small, framed photograph of my grandmother into my purse. It was a picture of us from 20 years ago, eating ice cream on a park bench. It was the only talisman I had against the coldness of the world. The offices of Blackwood and Associates were located on the 42nd floor of the Millennium Tower. The elevator ride up made my ears pop. When the doors slid open, we were greeted by a lobby that smelled of leather and intimidation. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, reducing the people below to insignificant ants. The furniture was sleek, modern, and undoubtedly cost more than the total rent of our apartment for the last 5 years. Everything here screamed power. A silent receptionist led us into a conference room paneled in dark mahogany. Arthur Blackwood was already there, sitting at the head of a long table that could seat 20 people. He did not stand up when we entered. He simply gestured to the 2 empty chairs across from him. There were no condolences this time, no pleasantries, just a thick stack of documents and a pitcher of ice water. Derek sat down and immediately leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. He tried to project an air of confidence, but he just looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. "So, Arthur," Derek said, his voice booming too loudly in the quiet room, "I assume we are here to expedite the probate liquidity. I know these fiduciary entanglements can get messy, but we are ready to facilitate a quick liquidation if the assets are substantial." Arthur stared at him over the rim of his thick glasses. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Mr. Vance," Arthur said, his tone flat, "please refrain from using terminology you do not understand. It gives me a headache." Derek's mouth snapped shut. He sat back, his face flushing a deep red. Arthur opened the leather folder in front of him. "Let us begin. Contrary to the popular belief circulated by your family, Mrs. Vance, your grandmother was neither senile nor destitute. In fact, the rumors of her bankruptcy were a carefully constructed ruse designed to filter out undesirable associations." Arthur turned a page, the paper crisp and loud in the silence. "For the last 10 years, Eleanor Sterling has been the silent partner behind several highly successful tech ventures in Silicon Valley. She rebuilt her fortune quietly and aggressively." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the photo in my bag. She had listened to me complain about money for years and never said a word. She had protected me by hiding the truth. "The total value of the estate," Arthur continued, reading from the ledger, including a diversified stock portfolio and liquid assets, "is valued at approximately $45 million. I heard a sharp intake of breath beside me. "Additionally," Arthur went on, "the estate includes the historic Sterling Manor on Beacon Hill, fully restored, and a penthouse apartment in the 16th arrondissement of Paris, France." Derek's hand shot out and grabbed mine under the table. His grip was crushing, grinding my knuckles together until I winced in pain. I looked at him. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. He was not looking at me. He was looking through me, seeing a future of sports cars and VIP tables. 45 million. Derek whispered, his voice trembling. "We are rich! Oh my God, Ilara, we are rich. Do you hear that? We are set for life, baby!" He turned to Arthur, a greasy smile plastered on his face. "This is incredible news. Truly. When can we access the funds? I have some immediate investment opportunities that require stop," Arthur said. The single word was like a gavel striking wood. Arthur closed the folder. He reached under the table and placed a heavy, black box on the surface. Next to it, he placed a separate, thinner file. "The distribution of these assets is not automatic," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto mine with a sudden intensity. "Eleanor left very specific instructions. Before any transfer of wealth can occur, There is a mandatory viewing of a video message she recorded 3 weeks ago. Arthur placed his hand on the thin file. And, he added, his gaze shifting to Derek with a predatory gleam. There is a special appendix regarding the husband. Arthur pressed a button on a remote control lying on the mahogany table. A large screen descended from the ceiling with a low hum, covering the panoramic view of the city. Static flickered for a second before the image resolved into the familiar, stern face of my grandmother. She was sitting in her favorite high-backed velvet armchair, the one she always sat in to read her mystery novels. She looked frail, her skin like parchment paper, but her blue eyes were piercing, alive with a terrifying intelligence. Ilara, my darling. Eleanor's voice filled the room, sounding clearer and stronger than it had in years. If you are watching this, then I am gone. I want you to know that I loved you more than anything in this world. Please forgive me for the charade of poverty. I had to know who loved me for me, and who loved the checkbook. You were the only one who came when there was nothing to gain. Tears pricked my eyes. I reached out instinctively to touch the screen, but my hand hit only empty air. Then, the woman on the screen shifted. Her expression hardened into granite. She looked straight into the camera lens, creating the unsettling illusion that she was staring directly into Derek's soul. And now, she said, her voice dropping an octave, let us talk about the leech sitting next to you. Ilara, Derek jolted as if he had been electrocuted. His face turned a ghostly shade of white. This is ridiculous, Derek stammered, pushing his chair back. I am not sitting here to be insulted by a dead woman. Come on, Ilara, we are leaving. He attempted to stand, but before he could fully rise, 2 burly men in dark suits who had been standing silently by the door stepped forward. One of them placed a heavy hand on Derek's shoulder and forced him back down into his seat with humiliating ease. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Arthur said, his voice cutting through the tension like a razor. We are just getting started. On the screen, Eleanor continued, a dark smile playing on her lips. You thought I was just a senile old woman, didn't you? Derek, you thought you could treat my granddaughter like garbage because she had no one to defend her. You were wrong. I hired a private investigator 2 years ago. Nobody hurts my granddaughter without paying the price. Arthur reached for the thick black box on the table. He opened it and pulled out a manila folder labeled Exhibit A. He slid it across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of me. The first truth, Arthur stated, is that Urban Tech Solutions does not exist. There is no startup. There is no app. There never was. I opened the folder. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the pages. Inside were bank statements, pages and pages of them. He has not been investing your money in business development, Arthur explained, pointing a long finger at a highlighted line. He has been funding a lifestyle he could not afford. Specifically, he has been using your savings to pretend he is a wealthy bachelor. I scanned the numbers, dinners at 5-star restaurants I had never been to, bottle service at clubs, designer clothes. It was all there, paid for with the money I slaved for at the design firm. But this, Arthur said, pulling out a specific document, is the most egregious offense in this file. He placed a withdrawal slip on top of the pile. It was from my retirement fund, the 401k I had been contributing to since I was 22. $50,000, Arthur read aloud, withdrawn 3 months ago. The signature at the bottom is yours. Ilara, but we both know you did not sign this. I stared at the scrawl. It was a clumsy forgery of my name. I felt the blood drain from my face. $50,000. That was my safety net. My future. Gone. Where is it? I whispered, my voice breaking. Derek. Where is the money he used it to purchase a customized Mercedes-Benz C-Class? Arthur answered for him, but not for himself, and certainly not for you. Derek was sweating profusely now. Beads of perspiration rolled down his forehead, dripping onto his expensive collar. He looked from me to Arthur, his eyes darting frantically like a trapped animal. It was... "Look, you don't understand business," Derek shouted, his voice cracking. "She is a partner, a silent partner. That car was a signing bonus to bring her onto the team. That old hag was crazy. She fabricated all of this because she hated me. It is all fake. The car is registered to a private address, not a business entity," Arthur said, ignoring Derek's outburst completely. "And the woman driving it is definitely not a business partner." Arthur looked at me, his expression softening just a fraction. "She is the reason he needs to look rich." "Elara." Arthur did not give me time to process the theft of my retirement fund before he reached into the box again. He pulled out a stack of glossy photographs and fanned them across the table like a blackjack dealer revealing a winning hand. The colors were vibrant against the dark wood. Turquoise water, white sand, and Derek. He was wearing swim trunks, holding a margarita in one hand and a woman in the other. She was young, blonde, and beautiful in a way that looked expensive. "The Tech Innovate Conference in San Francisco," Arthur said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or, as reality dictates, the Four Seasons Resort in Cabo San Lucas, dated 4 months ago." I looked at the photos. I remembered that week. I had stayed up late every night working freelance projects to pay for his plane ticket because he said it was a networking opportunity that would make our careers. He had sent me text messages complaining about the seminars being boring. "Her name is Monica. She is 24 years old," Arthur continued, consulting a sheet of paper. "She was the administrative assistant at the logistics firm Derek worked for, the same firm he claimed to have resigned from to pursue his entrepreneurial dreams. In reality, he was terminated for gross misconduct." Derek made a noise in his throat, a strangled sound of protest, but Arthur spoke over him. "She currently resides in the Onyx luxury apartments in downtown. The lease is in your husband's name. However, the monthly rent of $3,500 is auto-drafted from a credit card opened in your name. Elara, the statements are mailed to a P.O. box you did not know existed." The room seemed to spin. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces slammed into place with violent force. The denial letters for a car loan I tried to get last year. The mysterious drop in my credit score that I attributed to a glitch. And the phone calls, the relentless calls from unknown numbers that I had blocked, thinking they were spam or scams. They were not scams. They were debt collectors chasing a ghost debt that my husband had created. "He destroyed me," I whispered. "He destroyed my credit. He stole my identity." "He did more than that," Arthur said. He slid a printed transcript across the table. "These are recovered text messages between your husband and Monica." I did not want to read them, but I could not look away. The words were black and ugly on the white paper. "Derek, don't worry, babe. The stupid cash cow just got her bonus. I'll book the flight tonight." "Monica, when are you going to leave her? You said by Christmas." "Derek, soon. I just need to drain a little more out of the accounts. She is such a boring, gullible old hag. She believes anything I say. Once I have enough to secure the condo, I am gone. Cash cow." Old hag, gullible. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break, but a quiet, permanent fracture. The tears that had been threatening to fall simply evaporated. My sadness died, and in its place, a cold, hard rage began to solidify. It felt like armor. It felt like my grandmother. Derek saw the shift in my eyes. He realized that his anger was not working, so he switched tactics instantly. His face crumpled. Tears, big and theatrical, began to stream down his cheeks. He reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled it away as if he were made of fire. "Elara, baby, please. You have to listen to me." Derek sobbed, his voice pitching up into a whine. It meant nothing. I was under so much pressure with the business failing. I just needed an escape. I felt so emasculated because you were the one making all the money. I was lost. I never stopped loving you. Those texts, I was just saying what she wanted to hear. It was just a game. You are my wife. Please, Ilara. Don't throw us away over a mistake. He looked pathetic. The man I had idolized, the man I had worked double shifts for, was nothing more than a whimpering child caught with his hand in the jar. I sat perfectly still. I smoothed the fabric of my black dress over my knees. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I felt absolutely nothing. No love, no hate, just the indifference one feels for a cockroach before crushing it. You are right, Derek, I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I was gullible. Derek's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. We can fix this, baby. We can go to counseling. We can... Not so fast. Mr. Vance, Arthur interrupted, his voice booming through the room. Arthur reached into the black box one last time. He pulled out a document that looked official, stamped with a government seal. There is no we anymore, Arthur said, holding the document up. And before you waste any more fake tears, we need to address Exhibit 3. The final secret. Arthur placed the final sheet of paper on the table with the reverence of a coroner covering a body. It was a birth certificate. Beside it, he placed a high-resolution photograph of a toddler. She was adorable, with curly brown hair and bright eyes. She was smiling, holding a giant Mickey Mouse balloon. Her name is Sophie, Arthur said softly. She is 3 years old. I looked at the birth certificate. Father Derek Vance. Mother Monica Reed. The air left my lungs. It was not a gasp. It was the physical sensation of my chest collapsing. For 4 years, every time I mentioned having a baby, Derek had shut me down. We can't afford it. Ilara, he would say, kids are expensive. We need to be financially stable first. Wait until the startup takes off. He had denied me a family because he was too busy building one with someone else. She is a beautiful child, Arthur continued, his voice devoid of pity. And she is very well taken care of. Private daycare. Organic food, designer clothes, all funded by the silent partner. Arthur tapped the photo of the girl at Disneyland. Do you recognize the date on this photo? Ilara, Arthur asked. I looked at the timestamp in the corner. December 28th? That was 2 days after you received your year-end performance bonus. Arthur said, $10,000. You told me you gave it to Derek to pay off the business loan he claimed was accruing interest. Instead, he took Sophie and Monica to Disneyland for a VIP experience. I remembered that winter. I had stayed home, eating instant noodles and working through the holidays to get a head start on the next quarter, thinking I was helping my husband save our future. Meanwhile, he was wearing mouse ears and playing Father of the Year with my money. Derek did not scream this time. He did not cry. He simply slumped in his chair, his body going slack as if his strings had been cut. His mouth hung open slightly, extracting shallow, ragged breaths from the room. There was no lie big enough to cover this. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioner and the wet, rasping sound of Derek trying to breathe. On the screen, my grandmother leaned forward. The camera zoomed in on her face until her eyes filled the frame. Ilara, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a shout. You cannot build a castle on a rotten foundation. You have a good heart, my dear, but a good heart is a weapon in the hands of a bad man. You must sweep the trash out of your life before you can bring in the treasure. The screen went black. Arthur cleared his throat and stood up. He looked down at me, his expression solemn. The terms of Eleanor Sterling's will are absolute, he announced. You are the sole beneficiary of the entire estate. The $45 million, the properties, the stocks. It is all yours. Derek's head snapped up, a flicker of life returning to his dead eyes. However, Arthur continued, raising a hand to silence him, there is a condition precedent. You must sign the divorce papers today, right now, and the divorce must be absolute. Derek Vance receives $0. No settlement, no alimony, nothing. Arthur placed a pen and a thick document on the table. "If you choose to forgive him," Arthur said, looking at Derek with disgust. "If you choose to stay with this man, or give him even 1 cent of this money, the inheritance is void. The entire estate will be liquidated and donated to the Boston Society for the Protection of Stray Cats. You will leave this office with nothing but the husband you walked in with." The room seemed to shrink. It was the ultimate test. My grandmother was not just giving me money, she was giving me a choice. She was forcing me to value myself. Arthur looked at his watch. "You have 5 minutes to decide." The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to amplify the sudden, desperate silence of Derek Vance. He looked at the door, then at the documents, and finally at me. The realization that $45 million was slipping through his fingers terrified him more than the loss of his wife ever could. He lunged forward, sliding off his chair to his knees, grabbing my hands with clammy palms. "Ilara." "Honey, please," Derek pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "Think about our vows, for better or for worse. Remember, you promised. Forgiveness is a virtue, Ilara. You are a good person. You are not vindictive like her." He gestured wildly toward the blank screen where my grandmother had just condemned him. When he saw that I was not melting, his expression shifted from pathetic to conspiratorial. He lowered his voice, leaning in as if we were partners in a crime, ignoring the fact that Arthur was watching him with the intensity of a hawk. "Listen, I have a plan," he whispered hurriedly, his eyes darting around the room. "You sign the papers. We pretend to split up. You get the money. Then, in 6 months, when the dust settles, we get back together. We remarry in Italy. We don't let a dead old woman control us. Right. It is just paper. Ilara, we can outsmart her. Just take the money and we fix this later." I stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. For the first time in 5 years, I looked at Derek not as his wife, not as his support system, and certainly not as his inferior. I looked him directly in the eyes, and I saw the hollowness there, the fear I used to feel the fear of his judgment, his anger, his disappointment had vanished completely. "You know," I said softly, my voice steady, "you were right about something you said yesterday." Derek blinked, confused hope flickering in his eyes. "I was. See, I knew you understood deep down. Deep. You said I was nothing special." I continued, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "You said I was boring and lacked vision. You are right. I am not special." I picked up the heavy fountain pen from the table. The weight of it felt solid and reassuring in my hand, but my bank account is about to be very special. I leaned down and signed the divorce decree. I did not hesitate. My signature flowed across the line with the sharp precision of a final design approval. It was the easiest thing I had ever done. Arthur swept the papers away the moment the ink left the page. He stamped them with a satisfying thud. "Done," Arthur declared. "Now, on to the logistics of your departure. Mr. Vance." Derek stared at the papers, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse. What departure? We have assets to split. Community property. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. I get half of what she made during the marriage, and I am entitled to spousal support if her net worth just increased. You get nothing," Arthur interrupted, his voice like a steel trap snapping shut. "You seem to have forgotten the prenuptial agreement you signed 5 years ago." "I never signed a prenup," Derek shouted, standing up and slamming his hands on the table. "We were broke. We didn't have anything to protect." "You signed a waiver titled Asset Protection and Liability," Arthur corrected him, pulling out a yellowed document from his file. "Eleanor had me slip it into the lease agreement for your first apartment. You didn't read it because you were too busy playing video games while Ilara handled the paperwork. It states clearly that in the event of proven infidelity or financial fraud, all assets remain with the injured party. Arthur adjusted his glasses, looking at Derek with profound satisfaction. Furthermore, Arthur continued, our forensic accountants have reclassified the debts, the credit cards used for Ms. Monica Reed's apartment, the loan for the Mercedes, the vacation to Cabo. Those have been proven to be marital fraud under the law. They are not shared debts. Mr. Vance, they are solely yours. Derek's mouth fell open. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. We have already notified the creditors. Arthur finished ruthlessly. They will be contacting you directly. You are currently $75,000 in debt, with no assets, no job, and given the forged signature on the retirement withdrawal. I would say you are looking at a potential felony charge for identity theft. Derek looked at me, horrified. The millionaire lifestyle he had hallucinated 5 minutes ago had dissolved into a nightmare of bankruptcy and prison bars. Ilara, he wheezed, backing away. You can't let them do this. I will go to jail. I looked at him and shrugged. I am just a boring office worker. Derek, I said, I don't understand these complex financial matters. Arthur gave a subtle nod, and the two security guards moved with the synchronized precision of heavy machinery. They flanked Derek, each grabbing an arm in a grip that turned his knuckles white. Get your hands off me, Derek screamed, thrashing like a fish on a hook. Do you know who I am? I am an entrepreneur. I will sue this entire firm. I will sue you. Ilara, you will never see a dime of that money by the time I am done with you. His veneer of sophistication had completely dissolved, revealing the feral, desperate creature beneath. As they dragged him toward the door, he twisted his head back, his face purple with rage. You are nothing without me, Ilara, he spat, spittle flying from his lips. You are a boring, invisible nobody. You will come crawling back. You will. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut, cutting off his threats mid-sentence. The silence that followed was exquisite. I turned to Arthur. I felt calm, a strange, icy serenity that settled over my skin. Arthur, I said, I want you to send a courier to the address on the lease for Monica Reed. Send her copies of everything, the bank statements, the loan rejections, the proof of his unemployment. I want her to know exactly who she has been sleeping with. I paused, looking at the photo of the little girl on the table. But remove all documents referencing the child. I added, the girl is innocent. She does not need to be part of the collateral damage. Arthur nodded, a rare look of respect crossing his face. Consider it done. I left the building and took a taxi straight back to the apartment. I did not cry on the ride home. I made a phone call. I hired a premium moving company that specialized in emergency relocations. I told them I would pay triple their hourly rate if they could be there in 20 minutes and finish in 60. When I arrived, the apartment felt suffocating, filled with the ghosts of a lie I had lived for 5 years. The movers arrived promptly. I stood in the living room and pointed. Everything that belongs to him, I instructed. His clothes, his gaming console, his business papers, his expansive sneaker collection. Everything. Put it in boxes and leave it on the curb. If it is not out in 1 hour, you don't get your bonus. They worked like a swarm of locusts. I watched as Derek's life was dismantled and packed into cardboard coffins. While they worked, I called a locksmith. He arrived as the last box was being carried out. I had the locks changed on the front door and the mailbox. Then I sat down at my laptop. I changed the passwords to my email, my streaming services, and the online banking portal. I called my cell phone provider and blocked Derek's number. Then I blocked his mother, his sister, and his enabling father. I severed every digital tendril that connected me to his toxic orbit. The apartment was suddenly very quiet. The clutter of his gaming setup was gone. The pile of dirty laundry he always left by the hamper was gone. Then, the landline rang. It was a jarring sound. We never used the landline. It was only there for emergencies. I stared at it for a moment before picking up the receiver. Hello, is this Ilara? The voice was high-pitched, trembling, and thick with tears. It was Monica. Speaking, I said. He lied to me. Monica wailed, her voice cracking into a sob. I just got a package from a law firm. He told me he was the CEO of a logistics company. He told me his assets were just temporarily frozen by the SEC because of a merger. He is broke. He used your credit cards to pay for my apartment. I listened to her panic. It was the sound of a fantasy shattering against the hard rocks of reality. She wasn't calling to fight for him. She was calling because she realized the golden goose was actually a cooked turkey. He is completely broke. Monica, I said, leaning back against the kitchen counter. He has no job, no startup, and $75,000 in debt. But the rent is due next week, she cried, hyperventilating. The lease is in his name. But if he can't pay... I can't afford this place. I have a daughter. What am I supposed to do? He is your problem now, I said, my voice cool and final. You wanted him. You got him. Good luck with the rent. I hung up the phone. I walked to the center of the living room. It was empty. The floor was bare where his clutter used to be. The air smelled of lemon polish and possibilities. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that didn't taste like betrayal anymore. I was alone, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel lonely. I felt free. It took exactly 30 days for the dust to settle. With Arthur Blackwood's legal team operating like a pack of well-dressed sharks, the divorce was finalized with terrifying speed. There were no drawn-out battles or emotional mediations. Derek had no money for a lawyer, and with the threat of fraud charges hanging over his head like a guillotine, he signed every document Arthur put in front of him without reading a single word. The day the decree arrived in the mail, I walked into Urban Edge Designs for the last time. Mr. Henderson, my boss who had underpaid me for 6 years, was in the middle of berating an intern for using the wrong shade of beige. I placed my resignation letter on his desk. What is this? Henderson barked, barely looking up. If this is a request for a raise, the answer is no. You know the budget is tight, Ilara. It is a resignation, I said, my voice calm and clear, effective immediately. He laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. You can't just quit. You have the Anderson account to finish. And where are you going to go? No one else is hiring right now. You need this job. Actually, I smiled, adjusting the strap of my new Hermes bag. I really don't. I walked out of that gray office and never looked back. 2 weeks later, I launched Eleanor's Vision. It was a boutique design studio dedicated to restoring historic properties with modern sensibilities. It was not just a business, it was a tribute. I moved into the Beacon Hill mansion my grandmother had left me. It was a sprawling estate with good bones but tired interiors. I spent my days supervising contractors and selecting Italian marble, finally able to unleash the creativity that had been stifled for so long. I stripped away the heavy, dusty drapes to let the light flood in, transforming the gloomy halls into a sanctuary of gold and cream. While I was building my empire, Derek's house of cards had collapsed completely. The grapevine in our small social circle was active, and the news reached me that Monica had not taken the revelation of his bankruptcy well. Once the landlord realized the rent checks were bouncing and the credit cards were frozen, the eviction notice was immediate. Derek was tossed out onto the street. He had to crawl back to his parents' house in the suburbs, moving into their damp basement, the same basement he had sworn he would never return to. My name began to appear in places other than overdue bill notices. Architectural Digest featured the Beacon Hill renovation on their cover. The headline read, "The Heiress with an I. Ilara Sterling redefines modern luxury." I was no longer Derek's wife or the office worker. I was Ilara Sterling, philanthropist and designer. I used a portion of the inheritance to establish the Sterling Grant for Female Entrepreneurs. It was a fund designed to help women who were trapped in financial dependency. giving them the capital to start their own lives. Writing the first check felt better than buying any diamond. My life became a blur of first-class flights to Paris to check on the penthouse and high tea at the Ritz with potential clients. But the luxury wasn't the best part. The best part was the autonomy. I answered to no one. The true moment of triumph came 3 months later at a charity auction for historic preservation. I was wearing a velvet gown that cost more than my old annual salary, holding a glass of vintage champagne. Across the room, I spotted a familiar balding figure. It was Mr. Henderson. He was trying to network with a wealthy developer, looking desperate and sweaty. When he turned and saw me, he froze. He looked at my dress, then at the circle of influential people listening to me speak. He walked over, his posture changing from arrogant to obsequious in seconds. "Ilara," Henderson exclaimed, extending a hand. "It is so good to see you. I saw the article in the Digest. Stunning work, you know. I always said you were the most talented designer I ever hired. We should collaborate on something. I have a few projects that could use your touch." I looked at his hand, then up at his face. I did not take it. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my tone polite but distant. "I seem to recall you telling me I lacked vision." "Oh, well, you know how the business is," he stammered, his face turning red. "Stress of the job. I didn't mean it." "I am sure you didn't," I replied, "but my schedule is fully booked. I only work with clients who can afford my vision now." I turned my back on him to greet the mayor, leaving him standing there with his hand extended to empty air. I was not special to him when I was poor. Now, I was untouchable. The grand opening of Eleanor's Vision was the social event of the season. The studio was filled with the scent of fresh orchids and expensive perfume. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres, and the chatter of the city's elite filled the air like a sophisticated hum. I stood in the center of the room, wearing a midnight blue gown that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. It was a night of triumph. Then, the heavy glass doors at the entrance burst open. The hush that fell over the room was instant. Standing there, panting and disheveled, was Derek. He looked like a ghost of the man he used to be. His suit was wrinkled and stained, his hair was greasy, and his eyes were wild with desperation. He pushed past a stunned waiter, knocking a tray of glasses to the floor with a deafening crash. He spotted me and ran forward, throwing himself onto his knees right in the middle of the crowded room. "Ilara," he wailed, his voice cracking. "Ilara, please. You have to help me." The crowd gasped. People began to whisper, their eyes darting between the pathetic man on the floor and me. "I know I messed up," Derek sobbed, grabbing at the hem of my dress with dirty hands. "But think about the child. Think about Sophie. She is innocent in this. We have nothing. Ilara, Monica can't feed her. We are going to be on the street. Please, just alone. Just enough to get by. Have you no heart?" It was a masterful performance. He was trying to weaponize my empathy, hoping that the public pressure would force me to open my checkbook. He wanted me to be the villain who turned away a starving child. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked down at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. The fear, the anger, the betrayal, it was all gone. All that remained was pity for a creature so small. I gently pulled my dress from his grip. "I do not have a responsibility for your terrible choices." "Derek," I said, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the silent room. I paid for my freedom with 4 years of my youth. That price was already too high. I signaled to the head of security, a large man named Marcus who had been waiting in the shadows. "Remove him," I said calmly. "He is disturbing my guests." Derek screamed as Marcus hoisted him up by the collar of his cheap jacket. "You are cold," Derek yelled, his voice fading as he was dragged toward the exit. "You are a monster." "Ilara." I turned back to the crowd, picked up a fresh glass of champagne, and smiled. "My apologies for the entertainment." I said, "Please, Enjoy the evening." The room erupted into applause. They weren't clapping for the drama, they were clapping for the strength. As the party wound down, Arthur approached me near the coat check. He looked satisfied. "I have one final update for you," Arthur said, handing me my passport. "Monica Reed filed a police report against Derek this afternoon. She is suing him for fraud and financial deception. She has moved back in with her parents and wants nothing to do with him. Derek is officially alone." I nodded. It was done. The chapter was closed. 2 hours later, I was settling into the cream leather seat of a private jet. The engines roared to life, a powerful sound that vibrated through my bones. We were heading to Paris. The penthouse on the Avenue Montaigne was waiting for me. As the plane climbed into the night sky, leaving the lights of Chicago far below, I looked out the window. The city looked like a circuit board of gold and amber. I raised my glass of champagne to the reflection in the window. I remembered Derek's voice from that morning in the kitchen. "You are nothing special, Ilara." I took a sip of the cold, crisp wine and smiled. "You were right." "Derek," I whispered to the clouds. "I am not special. I am unique." The plane banked toward the east, toward the sunrise, and toward a future that belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear from you, so please comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed this story of justice and success, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.